to another episode of Well-Adjusted Mama. This is a podcast dedicated to educating and empowering women from preconception, pregnancy, birth, and through early motherhood on wellness lifestyle. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Brayton. I'm a maternity pediatric chiropractor and mother who has hand-selected experts in natural holistic healthcare specialties to shine light on options and choices during this exciting phase of a woman's life. Today's episode is focused on the topic of empowered birth, and my special guest is Suzzie Vehrs. And this episode is sponsored by Informed Pregnancy Plus, which is a fantastic streaming platform for pregnancy and parenting. You can experience it for free at informedpregnancy.tv. So let's talk a little bit about Suzzie. Suzzie Vehrs is a childbirth educator and founder of She Births Bravely, an organization that provides comprehensive education and support for expecting parents. She's worked with hundreds of families on their journey towards childbirth and parenting. Suzzie is passionate about empowering parents to make informed decisions about their birthing and parenting experiences. She uses evidence-based information and practical tools to help parents prepare for birth, breastfeeding or bottle feeding, and early parenting. Her classes are designed to be inclusive, respectful, and supportive of all types of birth choices, including natural childbirth, medicated childbirth, and cesarean birth. Her mission is to help mothers create a birth experience that is safe, empowering, and leaves them deeply bonded with their family. For more information, you can check her out at She Births Bravely. Hi, Suzzie. Welcome to the show. I'm very excited to have you on today.
Thanks. I'm very excited to be here.
So you're a childbirth educator and a doula, and I know you feel very passionate about empowering women around the birth process. So let's talk a little bit about what that means regarding having an empowered birth experience.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I have been a doula now for about 4 years. I've supported about 200 families through the birth process. And when they say that every birth is different, that is absolutely the truth. I think that when it comes to birth, it's a very challenging time because there is a lot of uncertainty and we don't always know exactly what to plan for because we don't know everything that will come our way. And also, a lot of people do experience trauma. So as we're preparing for birth, we are also sometimes asked to process other people's fears and worries and we have to be very intentional about creating a place inside of us where we feel that we are capable of rising up to the challenge so that we know that we have whatever it takes inside, no matter what or how our birth unfolds, that we will be okay through it, that we will be able to ask the right questions, make the right choices for us, and ultimately have an experience that leaves us feeling powerful and strong and very bonded and supported by our partners and our families and even the teams around us as far as our care providers. And that just leaves space for that joy that is also so inherent and so important in welcoming a child to the family.
Totally. I completely agree. I want to ask a question about the trauma you mentioned, other people's trauma. So you're referring to like a pregnant woman who is hearing negative birth stories from other women around her. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. I know for me, a lot of times when I am doing a prenatal with one of my clients, they'll say, oh, my friend just gave birth and XYZ happened and I'm so scared if that will happen to me. Or my mom said that, and people will go on and on and on. I don't want to actually add any more things to worry about. But it's very natural for people to share their experiences, and not everyone did have a positive experience with birth. So it's important that we're intentional of kind of separating our experience while holding space, and allowing people to speak and bonding over and learning from others as well.
Right. I think that, during pregnancy, we're very sensitive to these types of energies. So there needs to be some boundaries around that, and it's not our job as a pregnant woman to help other people process their trauma. That's where a professional would come into place. But there is opportunity to learn And so I think that's really the key, Reet, is like not making decisions out of fear based off of these stories from other people that were negative, but also learning how things can be done differently for your own birth experience and what you choose to create.
Right, right. And, you know, I had one client that put it to me this way. She said, Suzzie, giving birth was the hardest I've worked for anything in my life. And it left me feeling very accomplished and strong as a woman. And I wouldn't change that for anything. And I think, you know, two people can go through two experiences or the exact same experience. And one person could see that as I worked really hard and I achieved something great. And another person could be surrounded with all this negative self chatter of, well, it was hard, so I must not have been good enough, or I must have made a mistake or made a wrong choice. And I actually did that in my first birth with my first daughter as well, where I came out of it with a lot of very negative self-perceptions, I guess. Whereas by the time I had my second daughter, Hazel, I'd had enough kind of life coaching and more awareness of the birth process to recognize like, oh, wait, like this is more of like a hero's journey that everybody goes through. Not like we can talk about like how beautiful and natural birth is, but that doesn't mean that it comes naturally to us or that it's easy. And I think sometimes that those words are so similar that they get interchanged and the meanings get interchanged when they shouldn't.
Right. Yeah. Birth is not necessarily easy by any mean. Labor means work, right? It can be really hard work. And that doesn't take away from I think actually that's part of the empowerment, part of the spiritual, that hero's journey, that heroine's journey you're referring to. There's a spiritual evolution that's occurring during the labor and birth process, and especially an unmedicated birth. And, you know, I would say that anything that we've achieved in our life as women that we are most proud of required work and dedication and commitment and planning. It's like that is what life is about, right? When things are easy, they're not really appreciated.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I know when my first birth with Zoe, I had initially wanted to do a natural birth, and that was kind of the expectation of my family. Was everyone did natural. My in-laws family, my Zoe's father's family, was everybody did natural births, and so I should do a natural birth. And so I had taken a hypnobirthing class, and I actually fell in love with the idea, like some of the ideas in the class. But my big mistake was that when they talked about like creating a bubble of peace, I used that as an excuse to kind of like, okay, I also had all this unprocessed trauma from miscarriages and losses. And so like I literally just built a wall to separate myself from my emotions. And then hypnobirthing is a very time intensive class where you have all these meditations or hypnosis tracks where they actually take you through a process of learning how to almost like re-regulate your nervous system and bring yourself to a place of calm and peace. And I actually didn't do that part. I was like, oh, I read it. And so I thought like, because I conceptually understood it, that would be enough, but I didn't put in the work to actually like process my trauma and learn to regulate my emotions and recognize my emotions. And so when I did go into labor, I had all that fear that I had like put outside my bubble of peace popped back in, and it ended up being a very stressful experience. And I was like, okay, well, that didn't work. It wasn't until later when I had Hazel and I had more exposure over a long period of time with a friend of mine that was a student midwife that we met in a mom's group, where I realized like, oh, there is work and there is intention and there is slowness and there is a process of change and growth and evolution that we can go through as we approach birth that is so much more than like living in a bubble of peace or, pretending hard things don't exist. It's more a point of like recognizing like, hey, I am going to meet challenges on this road. How about I become prepared for them so that I have the confidence where I'm like, okay, yeah, I can do that and I will be fine.
Yeah, that's right. So that's an interesting point. So I feel like, preparing for motherhood is an amazing opportunity to do some of this deeper work on ourselves, like you were mentioning. And so part of the trauma of processing trauma is not necessarily other people's negative birth stories. It's our own life experiences that could happen even before that first birth, right? So it's not necessarily even previous birth trauma. It could be miscarriages, like you mentioned, and other types of trauma that we've accumulated over the years that is stored in our body. And during the labor and birth process, it can get brought to the forefront and center, right? Where the suppression is like not available at that point, right? It's just like, okay, here it is. And that's not an ideal. We're not going to be processing our trauma while we're laboring, right? Like that's not the time for it. So how can women who are preparing for birth do some of this deeper work on healing themselves and not only helping during the birth process, but for their motherhood and parenting going forward, how that's going to impact them as women and mothers?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So I think that there's also like depth to that question too, right? Because if you're talking about, well, how do we go about having a spiritually, physically, emotionally safe birth, then we're moving a lot beyond our medical system as it is and as it should be is really set up to monitor and treat. And that's so key in making sure that we stay healthy. But then beyond that, how we take care of ourselves comes into play, our nutrition and our movement, growing our connections and building bridges with other mothers. I know for me, it was so, so helpful to be in that new moms group after I had Zoe. And it was also helpful for me to connect with other women who were pregnant at the same time and going through the same experiences as me, because it was all so new and so different that it's really, really important that we have those people around us that we can kind of like learn from, go through it together, and grow with alongside. Whereas it's also important to grow with look to our elders because they have a lot to teach us. I know that I began connecting with my own mother in different ways through the childbirth era of my life. And then even deeper beyond that, I think there is a real sense and real need for us as women to really define what our purpose is and find what makes us happy in motherhood. Because I don't think, not everybody wanted to become a mother or feels like it's the right time or has like the perfect relationship or the perfect home that they always imagined they would bring children into. And so those bigger fears about our lives are things that we need to kind of start exploring and realizing like, hey, I have tools and skills and, sometimes that brings us to go to a therapist. I know that was extraordinarily helpful for me. And sometimes that means we journal a little bit more or we spend more time in that meditative state where we're releasing our fears and coming back to reestablishing that like calm and centered state from where we can make decisions that will feel good over the long term. I think to me, those are the things that really encompass like the path or the different steps or the different levels of care that we need throughout pregnancy and into that newborn era.
Right. I appreciate you mentioning the community aspect of pregnancy and new motherhood, because as women, I do feel like we really thrive when we're in that like-minded community. And so finding your tribe, I think, is extremely important. And it's beautiful to connect with women, like you mentioned, that are in that same perinatal journey as you are. You know, you're pregnant within a few months of each other and giving birth, and in that fourth trimester, and there's opportunities to share, connect. And, you know, if one woman's a few months farther on in the journey, she has maybe, you know, is able to come over and, you know, provide support. I remember a close girlfriend of mine coming over, and it was like, oh, we can breastfeed together, you know, like it's such a random way to, you know, connect with these other women, but it's just like a very unique opportunity, and it's very finite. That pregnancy, fourth trimester period of our life is very short when we look at the big scheme of our lives, right? But it's so sacred as well, and so transformational. So experiencing that with other women and having the ability to share, you know, fears and concerns and things that you might want to talk about and get support around. And new moms groups are great for that too, because other people have different life experiences and perspectives that can be helpful. I also know, like in my community, the moms, when they're connecting, they're like, oh, you know, go to the chiropractor for your baby's colic, right? And they're learning about things that they wouldn't have known from the pediatrician's office, right? So they're getting referrals and resources for practitioners in their community that are supporting their, you know, newborn, infant stage, and they're learning about different, you know, products that are helpful. And then there's a lactation consultant at the group that's supportive with breastfeeding, which can be challenging for a lot of new moms. So, you know, it's recognizing that challenges are real and they're going to be different for every woman, and every birth is different. Even with the same woman, having different birth experiences in a different baby will create different challenges. And it's like, one mom will be like, oh, I had no issues breastfeeding my first baby, and the second baby is like a whole nother, like, I don't even know what to do here. So we learn and grow each time, and recognizing that when there is those challenges, that we can get support from other women and other professionals in our community that are going to support us through that. I think that's so important, because when we don't get that support, that's where we see a lot of the postpartum mood disorders, right? Because there's this overwhelm, there's this feeling of being alone and failing, and almost like, well, no one else has gone through this, which is not true, right? So it's good to know that, yeah, other people might be struggling too, and they're strong in other areas, and this is how we all support each other.
Yeah. And I think what you said about, like, when you don't have that support, a lot of times that's when the perinatal mood disorder pops up. And I just remember feeling so isolated, you know, after I had my first baby, because you literally get catapulted into this new life. You know, when you're pregnant, you're still going about loosely about your days, your rituals, your routines. Then you have a baby, and suddenly you're like, eat, sleep, poop. You have to feed every 3 hours a day. You're spending this 40 hours a week breastfeeding, but it's at like 2 a.m. and 2 p.m. And, you know, you don't have a schedule or a rhythm, or a lot of the things that were familiar about life before are suddenly things that are unsustainable in life with a newborn. And so it is really, really helpful to have other people that are in that new phase, because even though, you know, from this perspective, looking back at my newborn phases, they are very short. But I remember with both my daughters having moments where I felt like it would last forever, or like, you know, the struggle when my daughter had a tongue tie and it hurt like a lot to breastfeed. I thought, this is impossible. I'm never going to be able to do this. And fortunately, a lot of the solutions are quite simple. It's just the difficult part is like getting out of our fear and worry. And I've had multiple moms tell me, like, I can't call the lactation consultant. What is she going to think about me? And I'm like, no, that's why she took her job, so that she can specifically support you in this moment. And I remember having those fears myself, that worry about reaching out and finding the resources, because it was kind of one of the first times in my life where I could truly had to show up really messy instead of like all put together. And that was really hard. And so I hope that as other mothers are listening to this, that if you are in like a moment of challenge, that you'll recognize that like that's when people want to be with you and to help you and to hold you and to be there for you the most. But they can't do that if you're not willing to let them in.
Suzzie, I want to ask you about birth plans. When a woman is looking to have an empowered birth experience, how important is it that she have a birth plan?
Oh my goodness. I'm glad you asked this. I feel like they are incredibly important. And I think that the reason that they are important is maybe different than the reason that is, you know, a lot of people look at their birth plan as, this is exactly how I want my birth to unfold. And if I write it down, it will happen like this. And I don't really, when I work with birth plans with my doula clients and my birth course students, that's not the way I see it. We use it as a point to talk through what their options are, because if you don't know what your options are, you don't have options. And then next, when we go through the options with my clients, I'll go through a checklist of every choice they have to make logistically, like which type of monitors do you want to be moving? How do you feel about the epidural? Do you want it right away, not offered, not even talked about? You know, people have very different opinions on everything. And then the point of knowing the options then is then you have a point where you can take your birth plan, you can go back to your care provider, and you can talk it through with them. And then if there are certain things that are really important to you, you can ask them to note it in your chart, so that if you're at the hospital and you're with, say, whichever doctor is on call or a nurse that just met you, you don't have to renegotiate things. I find this especially important for clients that I work with that have been victims of sexual abuse, and they're really worried about cervical checks and they don't want as many, or they have very specific things like, I don't want a cervical check until after I have an epidural, or I don't want it until I'm 10 centimeters or pushing, or things like that. Because often if you are able to have that conversation with your care provider in your pregnancy, then you get to triage. And instead of having to explain or negotiate or have a nurse say, sorry, no, this is our policy, we have to do this, it's already been negotiated. And instead of saying, you know, asking that person's permission, you can say, no, my doctor noted this in my chart, that we wouldn't do a check and triage. We would look at how frequent and strong my contractions are, and that would be enough in my case. And I think that birth plans are extraordinarily important because they are your first tool and best tool to communicate. Because if you're over in labor land where you should be allowed to be, you need something to communicate to people, the people that will be in and out and part of your care, to help them understand what type of care you want, what your philosophies of care are, and what a good experience would look like to you, because that will be different to everybody. And if it's not communicated well, then everyone around you is guessing, which sometimes they'll guess right and sometimes they just won't.
Hey, Well-Adjusted Mama listeners, I'm Dr. Laura Brayton, and today I want to share an incredible resource that empowers parents in many ways, including the breastfeeding journey. It's called Informed Pregnancy Plus. This unique streaming platform provides invaluable insights and support throughout your pregnancy, birth, and beyond. When it comes to lactation, discover the remarkable collections of documentaries, including Milk Factory, The Milky Way, Breast Milk, and We're Mammals. These films offer profound perspectives on breastfeeding, challenging societal norms, and embracing the natural beauty of motherhood. From understanding the biological aspects of breastfeeding and we're mammals to exploring cultural influences in breast milk, these films provide a comprehensive look at nursing. Informed Pregnancy Plus is an entire ecosystem of educational and empowering content for parents. Engaging web series, informative podcasts, beneficial workouts, yoga, and meditation. It's your comprehensive resource through pregnancy and parenthood. For less than the cost of coffee per month, you can gain access to the vast and growing Informed Pregnancy Plus library. Start your free trial, that's right, absolutely free trial right now at informedpregnancy.tv or download the Informed Pregnancy Plus app on Apple, Android, or Roku. Join the community of informed, empowered parents today on Informed Pregnancy Plus.
Right. So I agree with that. Like birth plans have to have flexibility and adaptability because that's the birth can go different ways. But you're not wanting to learn about your different options while you're laboring, because that's not a time really when our conscious mind is working its best. So when you have that information prior to labor and things are coming up, then you have a better idea of knowing the risk and benefits and making decisions from there. And then obviously it will change based off of your current health and the baby's health as well, and what needs to be done. If there is any type of red flags or, urgent things that need to be acted on, as opposed to getting out of the way and just letting the labor process do its thing.
I always suggest to my moms to, at the very top of a birth plan, to come up with a 1-sentence describer of who you are and your philosophy of birth, because in 1 sentence, you can really capture a lot about what your experience that you're hoping to have would look like. For some people, that could be, hey, we're a really naturally oriented family. We want to avoid as much intervention as possible, and we want to be as hands-off. We would like our care providers to be as hands-off as possible. And in that 1 sentence, it's pretty much like a nurse could look at that and be like, okay, they're probably going to want intermittent monitoring. We're probably going to be doing limited checks. That sentence kind of gives them like an idea of how you might like your birth to go and what even support that they should offer you. Whereas another person might say, hey, I am really concerned about pain in labor. I don't even like getting my eyebrows waxed. Please help me get resources to manage my pain as soon as possible. And, those 2 different birth plans, those 2 different moms are going to have radically different needs throughout birth, as far as their monitoring, as far as the way the nurse checks on them, as far as the type of communication they need. But a good nurse, a good care provider would be able to look at those 2 sentences and have a decent idea of how they should support you when you have your next contraction, or as they're trying to get you through triage, or how quickly they need to bring an anesthesiologist in, or if they should not even mention an epidural, and remind you of how great you're doing all the way through. So I do recommend that people, if you do have preferences, you should say, yes, while I'm dilating, these are the things in an ideal world I would want, and when I'm pushing and when I'm in the postpartum. But start with that first sentence that really describes who you are in a way that captures the essence of what you want in your birth experience.
I love that idea, because it does actually speak to a lot of those points, right? Just by giving the essence of who you are, your philosophy around health and birth, and your relationship with your body, right? Mm-hmm. All of these things are very important for women to be clear, like really know yourself, right? And know what you want and what your needs are. And then, to your point, communicate that in an also very simple and clear manner to those around you. So you can feel the support that you're wanting. And that support looks very differently, right? Like you mentioned, some women, that support is hands off, which is funny because a lot of people would be like, that's not supportive, but that's exactly what that laboring woman needs, right? Is that hands off. I don't want you coming in every hour asking if I want an epidural. That's, annoying to me. Or another woman's like, no, I want these interventions, very quickly and timely to support me through the birth process. So, every woman is different. Every birth is different. And, that's the beautiful thing around pregnancy and birth is we get to have a closer, deeper relationship with ourselves. And that goes back to helping us, get clear about our purpose as a woman and as a mother. And there's not a lot of other opportunities, I believe, in our life that we really get to sit with that and get really like connected at such a deep level. The intuition that's available to us during pregnancy and new motherhood is very unique and very special. And it's such a gift and an opportunity to really get connected with ourselves, like grounded into our bodies and connected with Mother Earth so that we're just so like, when questions and things are coming up, we're very clear about the answers that are right for ourselves and for our family. And there's not a lot of that, like, I don't know what I'm doing. And, we don't have to have that experience. We can be like, no, this is definitely what I need. And it's fine if it's different from what the woman next to you needs, right? But it doesn't matter.
It should be different than what the woman next to you needs because we're all individuals. So
right.
when you can capture that, it's really amazing.
Right. I want to ask you also around inductions. Inductions are pretty big in hospital births. And can you speak a little bit about the ARRIVE trial in 2018 and how that can impact a woman's birth experience?
Yeah, induction is becoming more and more popular. Since the ARRIVE trial, inductions are up more than 45%. I think that in the area I am, it really depends on who your OB is, but a lot of doctors will induce everybody at 39 weeks. And other people will induce people only for medical reasons at 39 weeks. And then when you reach 40, 41, and 42, pretty much everyone will induce people by 42 weeks. And everyone has their different cutoffs in that in between time. But I think the thing that it's really important to know about inductions is that, especially if you are wanting a natural labor and not wanting to use an epidural, that an induction is a significant change from your birth plan because it's very, very, very difficult to do a medical induction without an epidural. Once you're on the Pitocin, you lose a lot of control over. Nobody really has control over the intensity and frequency of their contractions, but with Pitocin, sometimes the risk is that they get so strong that often I will see people at 2 or 3 centimeters that are having all the symptoms and experiences of somebody that would without Pitocin would have when they're like 9 or 10 centimeters, like feeling an urge to push at 2 centimeters, shaking, vomiting, the type of physical reaction that is very uncontrollable, which is okay to go through transition, but it's not okay to go through for 20 hours through an induction.
Yeah, it's too long.
Yeah.
That synthetic oxytocin can create up to 50 times stronger uterine contractions because it is unnatural. And so to your point, if it can be too much for the body to handle, and not only from the pain perspective, but the other challenge I see as a pediatric chiropractor is a lot of strain being put on that fetus, potentially for several hours during the last part of the labor, and how that impacts the baby's alignment. and their nervous system function after the birth because of the Pitocin contractions. So, sometimes inductions are medically necessary. And what I like about a guest I had recently who says, if you do have a medical need for induction and you've tried natural ways to induce labor, right? There are other ways to induce labor besides drugs, but you got to get things going and you want to have a vaginal delivery over versus a surgical birth. You still want to go as slow and steady as possible with that Pitocin. So very small, gradual increases as opposed to just bombarding the system with this synthetic oxytocin that can create a lot of intense side effects that will be detrimental during the birth experience. And to your point, for a woman who's wanting to avoid an epidural, it may become physically impossible because the pain is more than the body's natural pain mechanisms can manage.
Yeah. Yeah. And Pitocin is something that it's sometimes medically necessary, but to induce everybody at 39 weeks, when you're talking about a drug that can increase the risk of hemorrhage, it can have, if a mistake is made, it can have consequences to a mom and a baby. It's actually one of just 12 medications that, is considered a high alert medication by the Institute for Safe Medication Practices. So it is something to use with care and concern. I loved that you mentioned some of these inductions are by choice and some of them are medically necessary. So if you're looking at I have high preeclampsia and my health is at risk if I don't deliver my baby, sometimes the risk is worth the reward, right? But that's a good conversation to have with your doctor, is what risk am I taking and how important is it that I do it now?
Right, or can I wait?
Hand, yeah, there are definitely things that you can do to prepare your body for an induction that are very safe and appropriate for most moms, assuming that your baby is still healthy and looking great. We're not talking about when babies are already showing distress. But I always suggest to my clients that if they are scheduling a date for their induction, that they do, there's a few things that have been shown to ripen the cervix. Eating dates, 6 dates a day, the last few weeks of pregnancy, has multiple studies that shows it helps ripen and prepare the cervix. Doing a 40-minute walk 4 times a week also helps prepare the cervix. And then the one that I recommend to my moms that I think is the most important and the most valuable if you are going into an induction is breast stimulation. That for people that do nipple stimulation, you can just take a breast pump, put it on the low setting, and you rotate 15 minutes on each side for an hour. So you do 15 minutes twice on each side. And there's been studies that if you do that 3 nights in a row, about 30% of people will go into labor on their own. And if you're not part of that approximately 30%, typically your Bishop score has gone up. So a lot of people will start off that induction a little bit more dilated, their cervix a little bit more moved towards the front rather than the back, and a lot more soft. And my experience has just been that when moms do that before their induction, there's a lot less time that we're using these medications that do have risks, right? And we've replaced that with just starting off, kind of like if you're running a race, starting off, 100 yards forwards. I also think there's a lot of sense in just waiting for your due date for a lot of moms.
Yes, exactly. Chiropractic adjustments are great at getting the pelvis aligned and helping start the labor process. Evening primrose oil vaginally, can also help to ripen the cervix. Raspberry red tea. There's so many things that can be done to just get things moving. I really like your idea of being weight bearing and walking and just having, even sitting on a birthing ball. Things about encouraging the baby to be moving lower and lower, which is going to help create some dilation in the cervix with having the weight of the baby's head lined up and pushing there. And, eggplant, I don't know, eggplant parm. That's a big one in my Hoboken, New Jersey area. These women order it and this gets things going. So, I think a lot of it too, when it comes to, surrendering to the start of labor is not being afraid of it as well, right? If we're feeling afraid of birth, then we're going to stay tight and tense, including our cervix and our muscles, and we're not going to be able to open and surrender as easily. And it can require a little more prying from drugs to get things opened up. So a lot of it is just really that meditation and breath work and visualizing the baby low in the birth canal, moving into position, you and your baby working together towards initiating the labor process and feeling safe, right? Our nervous system needs to feel safe that it's okay to birth, and recognizing that if we don't interfere with that process, the baby will come when the baby is ready. Due dates are estimated due dates. They are not a deadline of when baby needs to arrive in the world. So a woman's gestational period could be 41 weeks. So 39 weeks ain't going to cut it, right? For that baby, they're going to be gypped in their last couple of weeks of growth and development in that safe embryo, safe uterine containment, right? So I feel like that's also really important to recognize that, gestational periods range between 37 and 42 weeks. That's a very large amount of time. And 40 weeks is what, 3% of the population, right, are going to give birth on their estimated due date, assuming that due date is even accurate. So there's a lot of factors there. But once again, assuming your health is good, baby's health is good, less is more, staying active and moving is really helpful. And just not feeling also, I feel like that need to control the outcome so much, right? Because that is not helpful, I feel like, when we're looking at birth.
Right. And that word you use, surrender, is such a great mantra to use. Finding peace in the process, finding your place in the process, finding your partnership in the process. I think one thing that surprised me to learn was that labor, our body makes all these changes as we're getting ready for labor. We're building oxytocin and oxytocin receptors, and our body's making significant changes. Kind of like if you think about like a fruit ripening, if you think about an apple kind of going from like hard and maybe like green to like soft and red and sweet and ready to eat, our body's going through that gradual change as we're approaching when we go into labor. But the thing that actually starts the labor process is your baby's lungs release a hormone. And that's the thing that says, okay, your body has done everything to kind of get ready and prepared. It's actually the baby that starts the labor process. So I think there's in that, I hope that you see like, oh, I can wait for my baby to tell me when it's time, given that the rest of the medical situation is very looking very positive.
Healthy, yeah.
Right. And if it's not, if you do need a medical induction, I hope that you can go that way without fear. Just make sure to talk with your care providers take that birth plan back out and have another conversation about what's realistic. How can you help support me in this? How have those conversations about Pitocin. I suggest everybody have a conversation if you are trying to go as far as you can without getting an epidural, or you want to get through all of labor without an epidural. Another thing to have noted in your chart is that if you decide your contractions are too strong and you can't handle them, that you can say you want the Pitocin turned off so that you can have a conversation with your doctor from a place that's not having really strong and frequent medically induced contractions. Because some people, when you turn that Pitocin off, your body really will take over. When you use Pitocin, your body actually creates more natural oxytocin as well. So some people, yeah, you have a little whiff of the Pitocin and that's all you need. You turn it off and then you're laboring on your own. And other people really will need the Pitocin to create contractions all throughout labor. And unfortunately, so just have conversations with your doctor about that before, because if you've negotiated that before labor and it's in your chart, then it doesn't matter who's on call. It doesn't matter who the nurse is. You can just refer to my doctor said you will turn it off when I ask for it to be turned off. And then if you do have to make other decisions and go back to using that, you can, right. But you can regroup and say, okay, now I've realized, given the change in situations, maybe I'll choose a different path for coping. I see a lot of inductions go very well, and they are not necessarily something to fear, but just, I always consider them like you're driving through the school zone, right? You're going a little bit slower. You're being a little bit more cautious. You're paying closer attention. You're speaking up for what you need a little bit more. But that doesn't mean that you expect something bad to happen at the end. I deliver my kids safely through the school zone to school every single day. And for most people, inductions do work out quite well.
Right. Exactly. Slow and steady. Mm-hmm. And the adaptability component, like you just have to let go of any rigidity around what you're looking, and understanding that an empowered birth does not have to mean only the original birth that you're wanting to have, right? Like if your birth goes sideways and has some new things incorporated into it, it can still be an empowered birth experience. And that's really based off of how that woman is feeling, that she's feeling heard and respected as she's moving along that journey. Even if it was even if she had originally maybe didn't want an epidural, now has one, that doesn't mean that she's less empowered, right? So, or even needing a cesarean birth, for example, that can still be an empowered birth experience. I do find having a birth doula at whatever type of birth you have is a wonderful way to create an empowered birth experience, to have that emotional support, to help navigate all the decisions that might be coming up during the labor and birth process. Doulas are so valuable to have on hand, especially for a hospital birth experience.
Right. I completely agree. I love what I do. And it is nice to have somebody there that can help protect your vision and your needs when you are trying to be in labor land. And it's also nice to have somebody that might be able to help you recognize and honor your evolving needs through the process, because sometimes we go through the labor process and we understand more about what we need because it's the first time we've been in this situation. And now that we're there, we know. And so I always tell people it's okay to make changes as long as they're heart-centered and reflecting your true needs. And that as a doula, my goal is to understand you well enough that I can help you recognize, uncover, and then meet the needs that you have in any given situation throughout the process.
That's beautiful. Suzzie, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
Oh, last thoughts. You are made to give birth. Your body knows the way, and there's so much beauty in the journey. I know, when I go hiking, sometimes I spend the whole time staring down at my feet, looking only up, placing one foot in front of the other. And I would just encourage you that if you find yourself in that spot, like where you're just looking at where you're going and feeling the effort of the work, to lift your eyes up and look around and take moments to really bond with your baby and appreciate the beauty in the moment, because it is a very beautiful and important time.
Beautiful. Suzzie, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode with my special guest, Suzzie Vehrs. I think one of the things that I really appreciated about this episode and speaking to Suzzie is really recognizing that as women, we're all individuals. We all have different belief systems, backgrounds, and influences in our life thus far that really will help us form and create the type of pregnancy, birth, and motherhood experience that we are creating. And really recognizing that there's not a one size fits all regarding pregnancy, birth, and parenting, and to really be very connected to intuitively what's best for us as a woman going through that process, and then making decisions based off of that instead of following a generic blueprint of what's expected during pregnancy and birth that may or may not match our values, philosophy, and experiences.